So today's video is going to be all about how to make a travel journal. I have been doing this travel journal for about 5 months now and have learned so much over the course of the last few spreads, especially on how to make something look cohesive and really reflect my experience and also be really fun during the process. And because I've been getting a lot of DMs and emails with people actually sending me their travel journal, even my mom has started a travel journal, which if you're watching this, Mom, great job. I'm really proud of you. But I thought it'd be fun to just talk about how to make a travel journal, how to make a good cohesive spread. And before we get into it, I thought you could just pause the video like normal, grab yourself a cup of tea or any other beverage you want and get cozy. And then we can do a travel journal with me with this Athens experience. This is one I did from our time spent in Athens in Greece. But I thought it was a really nice spread to use kind of to show my process and how I think about things. So let's just get into it. This one is me starting to look through my journal, and I kind of bring this notebook with me everywhere I go. I write notes in it. I do urban sketching in it. Lou and I plan out videos, and I like to have a journal with me to handwrite notes and things like that. So when we were going through Athens for the day, I also brought the journal with me and did some urban sketching. And for me, I like to process things either by doing urban sketching or even just taking photos on my phone. It's then really nice to have those little mementos either to use in the journal spread or just to spark my memory and kind of bring me back into the moment. So this is a shot of me in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and I really loved it there. It was just filled with all these beautiful sculptures from these tiny little guys, which I think were kids' toys or something like that. And then also really beautiful large sculptures that were super inspiring. So I took time during that museum visit to just stand and look at things. I think that that's one of the nicest things about urban sketching is that it really forces you to slow down. Museums and just sightseeing in general can be overwhelming because there's always so much to look at. And then when you leave, at least for me, I feel like I saw so many things, but like I'm not sure what really stuck in my brain and what will be turned into like long-term memory. But when I urban sketch, it like forces me to be like, why don't I just pick one or two things to really look at, take in all those details, and then now when I like look back at our time in Athens, this museum really stands out, and I don't know if it would the same way if I didn't do urban sketching. And so I also like the urban sketches because then I can like cut them out and then put them in the travel journal spread. I love drawing, but I feel like I'm not always the most confident when it comes to my drawing skills. So drawing in a notebook like this is no pressure at all. It's really stress-free. If I mess something up, I can always start again, and who cares if it's messy anyway, it doesn't matter. But then sometimes when I go to my travel journal, I'm like, I get a little nervous like drawing directly on those like big white pages, and that's, I feel like, is a really fun way to start a spread, is to have a bunch of little urban sketches or doodles that you can cut out and move about the page, so you don't have to feel the pressure of once you put a mark down, it's there for good. So this is just me cutting out all the little drawings that I got from our day in Athens. The big piece of paper there with the sculpture, I tore out from some magazines, and that's another thing I would really recommend if you're starting a travel journal, is just to go to a thrift store or some sort of secondhand shop where they have magazines and get a bunch of different things that kind of feel like they're your vibe. So for me, I got a bunch of National Geographic stuff. I think I got some of the National Geographics when we were in Barcelona at a market, and then some of them when we were in Venice. Because my husband and I, if you're new here, we live in a van, so I don't have so much room to hoard all these different magazines and stuff, which is probably a good thing because I think I would collect way more than I need. Oh, look at Lou. Oh my gosh, his hair is so short. It's funny. I'm like recording this the day before the video goes up, but this footage is actually from a while ago, so his hair has gotten much longer, but that is besides the point. Okay, back to the journal. The journal, I was saying, is that it's really nice to have things that you can make collages from. So I would get your hands on some cheap secondhand magazines. Don't have to be National Geographic. It can really be anything. And then the other thing I'd recommend is getting different kinds of paper, because I've found that one of the nicest things that makes my travel journal entries come together is when I layer a lot of different things on top of each other. So if I put down, see on the base of this page, I'm using this magazine cut out with the sculpture that really made me think of the Parthenon, which we go to later in the video. But that I used as my base, and I kind of was like, okay, from here I can layer on top the Athens. I personally like to label the entries so I know what they're about, but I really have enjoyed layering different textures. So that base was like a little bit more glossy than the Athens letter or like cardstock kind of feel. And I feel like in the future I might even try to do some dried plants, maybe that like if you pick a wildflower from a hike, then you could dry it and put it in the travel spread, or even like a Polaroid picture or cutting out some printed photographs that you had, I think could create nice textural balance. And the other thing that I've realized too over time is picking a color palette for your spread makes things much easier, because otherwise you can get kind of overwhelmed. I really figured that one out actually in the last travel journal I did from Scotland, because that I chose green because Scotland is really, really green. And so for Athens, I ended up choosing a neutral palette. So I was gonna do just black and white, but then I realized the texture or the color of my paper for my journals, like it's not pure white, it's a bit like a light cream, and all these pillars and the golden hour light that was coming in was like a lot of cream. So when I went back to the spread, I was like, okay, we have this black and white base of this sculpture, and then I can do the Athens in white, and then I kind of was layered from there. I think I found kind of like a gray cement block wall, and I cut that out to kind of tie the second page together. These pillars I actually found at a secondhand store. It's kind of like a cardstocky, thick paper as well. And I got that in Venice, and I think that's another thing too, is that sure, this spread is about Athens and it's about our time exploring that city, but not every single piece has to be like completely connected to that place. Like, I think that this sculpture on the left page is like from Italy, technically, when I read the detail from the magazine, and this piece of paper I got of the pillars is from Venice, also from Italy. But for me, when I look at it, it reminds me of our time here in Athens. So I think that's important too, is like you're trying to create a memory for yourself. So don't feel like constrained by your materials if they don't completely come from what you're writing about or drawing or collaging, the other things. And that, I guess that gets me to another tip. One of the things that I love to include in my travel journal entries is urban sketching, just because it makes it easier to put the spread together. But I would encourage you, if you're starting, especially at the beginning, to get really creative and super experimental with what mediums you choose, because I had never done any collage before I started this travel journal almost half a year ago, and now I really love it, and I've learned to play around with layers, and I feel like it's a space that I would definitely love to explore more. And then here, this is just like ballpoint pen doodling, but I've also, in a ton of my journal entry spreads, used watercolor, and I love to watercolor, and I never get around to it as much as I want to. And I always, like, when I make travel journal spreads, I'm so happy when I include watercolors, because it's a medium I love to play around with. So that's another thing I would say, is don't confine yourself just to one thing. If you feel like you want to use crayons or markers or colored pencils or make your own confetti or dried plants, really anything is fair game when it comes to a travel journal entry or an art journal entry. And I feel like the medium really lends itself for you to be really brave, because it's like, this isn't going to hang on a wall. It's just a journal entry. There's no pressure. You don't even have to share it with anyone if you don't want to. So that part I've really enjoyed, is just using it as a space to be creative and experimental and not take things so seriously. So as you can see here, the spread is kind of coming together, and I've used those little doodles or urban sketches from the museum and keep playing with them on the page. And that's the other thing that I really recommend. Even though you might think that something is set in stone in your entry at some point, wait until all of it has really come together before you start gluing things down, because I've had so many moments in the first few of them where I started gluing things down and then I was like, oh, actually I could like layer one more thing here. And then it's like, oh man, it's already glued down. And then you are debating, can I pull this off without ripping the paper? And so I would just say, get it like pretty almost done before you start gluing. The other thing is to make sure that you have the right kind of glue stick. I had a glue stick like this one, like I don't know what the actual name is, it's like a hard glue stick. Kind of reminds you of like arts and crafts when you're a little kid. And I had one of those, but then I forgot to put the cap on tightly and it dried out. And then I had this other kind of more wet glue for a couple of my entries. And when you use that like wet glue on all these like magazine cuttings or even the thin journal paper, it makes everything wrinkle and doesn't look as nice as it could. So make sure that you're using a glue stick that can be used for mixed media and it doesn't make your papers wrinkle. The other component that I really enjoyed for I think almost all of my entries is I kind of also write a little kind of like reflection on the experience, whether it's on the actual day or week or whatever traveling that I'm reflecting on, or sometimes I even reflect just on the creative experience of making that page that day. But for me, words are really important. It's like how I process my life. And so I really enjoy having some handwritten things on the page as well. And so I think that's like really my biggest tips. I would say don't take it too seriously. Find a journal size that works for you. I really like having the big pages because it lets me have the urban sketches be larger and it leaves more room for me to play on the page. But some people could feel like a smaller one fits their personality much better and they could just do it in a cafe and just doodle on the pages and reflect in the moment. So I think it's about finding a style that works for you. And for me, I've really enjoyed having this big page. So thank you. I hope that was helpful and I will see you soon.